Alright, we're going to be talking about spring equinox. What's going to happen next year on the spring equinox? Well, this is my Christmas message to you, and we're going to talk about exactly what's going to be occurring. Now, I shouldn't say exactly, but something that's most likely going to occur, judging by past events and a pattern of a sequence of events that have happened. And judging by that, one is able to then say, okay, well, this is probably what's going to occur in the future. And because of that, I'm going to have to supply some evidence to that effect. So what I'll start with first is, what is the spring equinox and what does it mean for all the various peoples on this planet and for the various cultures and religions and what have you. Well, it's always been, no matter what it's called, what holiday, it's a holy day, it's always been I would say, especially in the northern hemisphere, a sacred day to most peoples at various times. Even today, it still hasn't changed yet. I mean, today we might not depend on the sun's transit into the sign of Aries as a means of survival, because, well, we can, at least here in the Western nations, we can go to grocery stores and we can get food because we're so globalized and it's so great, and we're able to get food all year round, any kind of food that we want, as long as you have enough money to buy what you want. So, but as a matter of not even too long ago, even a century ago, it was really a matter of survival, not just for peoples outside of the West, but in the West too, and people that actually were 90% of the population was rural or whatever, I think, and then 10% was urban. So even the urban environment element, they depended on what was grown in the rural areas, and so everybody was very dependent on the sun and the return of spring for calving, for gardening, for growing all sorts of food from the soil. And we still depend on that today, but there's only a few specialists, I guess, that grow pretty much all the world's food, or harvest it by fishing or whatever, or by slaughtering animals. And that's given to, basically, that is the food for the whole world as of right now. If something were to disrupt that, well, obviously that could change overnight, literally. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about then was, why am I bringing up the spring equinox? Well, I was going to actually do this upload on the winter solstice, which was 4 days ago, and I didn't get around to it, so I'm doing it on Christmas Day, whatever. Now, we got the solstice, sun stays still, alright, so again, according to the pagan calendar, or whatever you want to call it, that is a special event to some people. Most people, but I should say that it's more of a special event to certain people that are higher up in the hierarchy of humanity. Now, the spring equinox, again, the same thing, which is basically the sun. In the old times, it was considered something that came back to life. So the sun died, and after dying, and I guess you could say, well, where did he die? Did he die in the fall equinox? Did he die at the winter solstice? Or whatever, take your pick. But basically, he comes back into the peak of his strength at the spring equinox. And then, of course, really hits his peak at the summer solstice and midsummer's night. So why I'm bringing this up is because, well, I should just start off with a quote, actually, a very interesting quote, and that will kind of establish the foundation, I suppose, of what I am about to share with you. And so it's a quote actually from Liber 777, which is, again, Aleister Crowley book. It's a good quote, I like it, so I'm going to start with that because I think it's very appropriate for this video. And that is, quote, "Aries is scarlet, being the house of Mars in the sign of the spring equinox, where occurs the fiery outburst of the new year," unquote. So that is, again, is from Liber 777, Aleister Crowley. Now, I like that. Aries is scarlet, red. And the color of red, what is red? Well, it's red. It's a color of war, color of blood, color of lust, even a color of sex. And the house of Mars, well, yeah, because Aries is ruled by Mars. So again, Mars being the god of war, Aries, Marduk, all the various names from the various cultures and languages. So all mean the same thing. It's just referring to that planet. And there's been something that was noticed by peoples, especially astrologers / astronomers, that certain celestial events occurring in the heavens above usually meant there would be some kind of corresponding action below here on Earth, which is again that Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. Now, Mars also additionally being the god of war, there have been things that have occurred when Mars was, let's say, close to our planet, or closer, I should say. So when one time in 2003, and right around the spring equinox, and that was when Gulf War II was launched, the planet Mars was at a record, I forget, some kind of record distance. I mean, it was close, very close to the planet Earth. And it just so happened that a war was launched on Saddam Hussein and on Iraq by President George W. Bush. And again, that was called Gulf War II. We all know about it. And was it a coincidence? No, it wasn't a coincidence, because even if these planets don't have an effect on the peoples down here, which obviously they do, but let's say they didn't. Even if there are people that are in power that believe that these certain celestial events, that certain actions have to be performed down here on planet Earth in order to bring about certain results. So again, why was that war launched? Well, because the planet Mars just happened to be so close, and again, the war was launched on the spring equinox in 2003, and not only on the spring equinox in 2003, but the spring equinox of that year, 2003, was also coincided with the Purim of that year. So you had two holy days falling on the same day, which makes it a double holy day, I suppose you could say. And we're going to get into a triple holy day that's going to occur next year, and I'll get into that very quickly. So that it can be verified what I'm saying is as far as the Purim and the spring equinox, both occurring on, what was that, March 20th. I'm just looking at, you can just go to Wikipedia. March 20th, 2003. I think the Purim might have occurred on March 19th or March 20th. But Purim is a 2-day event anyway, a 2-day holiday. So my point is that that's when it occurred. And that brings to mind the book of Esther, but which I'll get into that briefly. But right now, I want to also bring in Gulf War #1, which was started in August 2nd. I'm just looking at a Wikipedia link, 1990. It lasted all the way till February 28, 1991. And so, as far as that date in August 2nd, I didn't look into that date and if there was a significance to that date. But as far as February 28, 1991, that was on a Purim. So this war, the first Gulf War, climaxed on a Purim once again. And so again, a holy day, holy to certain peoples that, well, I mean, there's so many holy days on the calendar. There are a lot of them, and to pay attention to them all, you could probably basically look at each significant, perhaps global event that occurs in the news and that happens to make the headlines, and you'd probably be able to look at that and look at that specific date and say, oh, okay, well, this has a significance to the Islamic calendar, or to the Jewish calendar, or Christian calendar, or the pagan calendar, or a Zoroastrian calendar, or a Hindu calendar, a Roman, Greek and Roman, or Roman calendar, and on and on and on. So it's always interesting to look deeper at these kinds of things and find out what the real significance of it all is, because just to look at the surface, you're never going to really see the picture for what it is. So that was Gulf War I. Purim was Gulf War II, even more impressive because of the spring equinox and a Purim occurring on the same day. The Libya conflict, by that I mean not the Civil War so much, but the NATO bombing of Gaddafi in Libya, which occurred in 2011. Again, looking at a Wikipedia link here. And I remember this actually years ago. I had noticed this when it occurred in 2011. It says right here the dates of when it's called the 2011 military intervention in Libya. Started on March 19, 2011, ended on October 31st, 2011. So 2 holy days. March 19th back then was not only the spring equinox, but it also was a Purim, so a double holy day. And then it ended here on an October 31st, which is Samhain, Halloween, whatever you want to call it. Another holy day. Was that a coincidence that it started on that date, and was it a coincidence that it ended on that date? Well, no, of course not. I mean, it just so happened that victory was called for on Halloween and not a couple days before or a couple days after. Well, of course not, because that's how the people that really run this planet, well, the way their minds think, to them, all these dates are very sacred to them, just as certain dates are sacred to the laity, I suppose, of Christianity or Islam or Judaism or whatever religion, Hinduism. And each date has a different meaning to each layer of people in the hierarchy. Now, so yeah, that was on also a Purim and a spring equinox. Now, as far as what is coming on March 19th is interesting. And why is it interesting? Well, in light of the recent developments that have occurred, we hear, these rumors of, I don't know if it's actually occurred or is going to occur, but we've heard the declarations, I should say. So first, we've heard a declaration that troops will be withdrawn from Syria. I don't know if that'll be all U.S. troops are going to be withdrawn or the majority of them, whatever. The declaration, we've all heard about it. So everybody's happy, like a Christmas gift. It's not also coincidental when it occurred, around basically the Christmas and solstice of this year. So that too is not a coincidence. Then we've heard the declaration of troops also going to be pulled out of Afghanistan. Now, I don't know when or if this is really going to happen, but the declaration was made. So it looks like these perpetual wars for perpetual peace that are being waged in the Middle East are coming to an end. But are they really? Well, I would have to say no, because of what is going to occur astronomically and astrologically speaking in the spring equinox of next year. And we'll get into that right now. Alright, so spring equinox of next year is going to be on a Wednesday, Mercury Day, March 20th. And not only is the spring equinox going to occur on that time, but we're also going to have the first day of Purim occurring in the evening of Wednesday, March 20th, and it ends in the evening of Thursday, March 21st, Purim being a 2-day holiday. Now, so we got 2 holidays converging on one day. Now, there's a third holiday to actually take into consideration. Now, this will be, there'll probably be disagreement on this, because there's going to be the Passover, but it's going to be what I call the biblical Passover, as opposed to the rabbinical Passover, because the rabbinical Passovers, every few years or whatever, it does get the date correct as far as going by biblical chronology is concerned, or the biblical way of telling how a Passover is going to occur. But the rabbinical calendar has something to do with every 19 years it goes by this Babylonian astronomer. I forget what his name was. It's not Metatron, it's something Metron. So it's called something like the Metronic calendar. And again, going by memory, I don't have a window open here. And that calendar is something like every 19 years it has some kind of cycle. I forget, I can't really get into the details of it. However, the calendar that I'm referring to, the biblical calendar, is something that came to my mind. Well, first, I went by, when I was checking this out, when I used to back in my Bible study days, I wanted to kind of figure out and pinpoint when the biblical Passover occurred every year. So we had there's, you know, some people would say, well, it's solar and it's lunar, or it's lunar, and some people are like, no, it's this, and this is how you do it, and that's how you do it. And basically, I think it's a solar-lunar calendar, both, and with a combination of the stars in the heavens too. And so first, the one was where it got almost accurate was the Karaite calendar, which was Michael Rood and Nehemiah Gordon. But they go by the sliver of the new moon, which is something that you can see with your naked eye. But when that occurs, the moon is already a few days old, 2 or 3 days old or whatever. And so that is inaccurate. So then how did I find out what was accurate? Well, I read this book called Wheel of Stars by Andrew Gabriel Roth. Anybody interested in this subject might want to check that out. So when I looked into that, and I looked at his method that he showed in his book, and I thought, okay, well, this looks correct. And how was that confirmed? Well, when those little blood moons were going on, they were going on the Passovers of years past and on the Feast of Tabernacles. And I thought, to me, that was your 2 or 3 witnesses that one needed as far as establishing a matter. So you had 4 witnesses, because I remember actually watching these moons and doing uploads on them. And so that, to me, basically confirmed that what Andrew Gabriel Roth said as far as being able to figure out when the biblical Passover is it was his situation that was correct. He has this thing called, on his website, called One Faith, One People Ministries, and he calls it the Eternal Torah calendar. And so I was looking through that. I actually usually check it out every year. And as far as the biblical calendar, biblical Passover is concerned, which I will not get into all the details as to trying to prove it or not. It's, again, something someone could look at this on their own. I'm just scrolling up here. And this is weird. Anyway, I don't know why I'm seeing a blank, but on March 21st of 2019 is when we have the biblical calendar. So we're going to have 3 holy days converging on one day. Now, that's significant, not to most people of the world, because they have no idea how things work and they don't pay attention to these things. But as far as what we would call the occultists that run the system, well, to them this is going to be very important. And they're not going to be able to help themselves, because they're going to have to take advantage of this day to launch a war. And who will that war be with? Well, I'm going to assume it's going to be with Syria and Iran. And whether it could be either or, but it wouldn't matter if it was one country that was attacked first, because obviously the other country would have to come to that other country's defense, mutual defense. So Syria and Iran being allies, whichever country gets attacked next Purim, the other country will also be involved. And maybe other countries will get involved too, other Islamic countries and maybe even non-Islamic countries. It could actually spiral into something even bigger than some localized event. And so, yeah, we got, like I said, 3 holy days falling on one day. Going by what has happened in the past, what I just mentioned, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, the Libya intervention by NATO. The fact that these 3, and I'm not saying other wars haven't occurred, but I'm just going to go by those 3, that you got your 3 witnesses, because those have occurred on a Purim. I'm going to have to say that Purim/Spring Equinox, and then I'm going to have to say that there's going to be a war next year, because you got 3 holy days happening on one day. And that is something that just can't be ignored by, once again, the people that actually rule over us, who actually run things. They really run things. We don't. We can fool ourselves with the illusion that we are in control of global events and the kind of events that affect the whole planet, but we can't really do anything except respond to what has happened and what will happen. Now, I think I was going to bring up the full moon. Yeah, okay, so anyway, the biblical Passover is on a full moon, so that's why there's a full moon on next March 21st. So again, coinciding with Purim and Spring Equinox. Let's see if we're going to mention anything else here. So the pagan calendar or whatever, so basically you have your pagan calendar, you have your 8 major holidays. I guess this would be like a European pre-Christian calendar. So you have Ostera, which will be, Ostera, which again is just another name for Easter. So why do I bring up Easter? Because we're going to get into the next part of this upload, and we're going to bring up the book of Esther in the Bible and bring up the 2 characters of that book, of that short 10-chapter book, Esther and Mordecai. And obviously that's a very, what is you'd call an astronomical / astrological biblical book. It's a lot different from the other books of the Bible because, well, it's pretty apparent what is being said in that, and we'll get into that. So yeah, Esther is on the 21st of March, spring equinox. Again, another name for Easter, which we also celebrate on our modern calendar by the name of Easter. Whenever that falls, it doesn't fall on the spring equinox, because I forget how it goes. It always has to fall on a Sunday after a certain time. Can't recall all the details of that. But let's get into the book of Esther. Okay, so Esther, why I'm bringing this up is, well, you have the name Esther. It's just another name. It's just a variant, I should say, of the name Ishtar. And that being a variant of the name Easter or Ostera or whatever word you want to say. But I don't know. It's all the same thing. Another name for that would be ISIS, which what do we always hear in the news? The terrorist group ISIS. Ooh. And we hear about, well, what's another thing? Mary, Mother of God. And so like the goddess worship, mother worship, feminine, the worship of the feminine principle, the feminine principle being personified into a female woman, and that female woman usually has 2 aspects, and both of those, one aspect being the motherly aspect and the other aspect being the lustful aspect, not just the wife but the sacred prostitute, I guess you could say, the goddess of sex, Venus. And so with Ishtar, or Esther I should say, it's just, again, we have in the book of Esther 2 thinly veiled names that should be apparent to anybody that's unbiased, and they should be able to read that and say, okay, well, is this really a biblical book, or is this something a little bit different? So when you get to the name Mordecai, well, you got Strong's Concordance, and there's 2 different definitions to Mordecai. There's one is little man, and the other one is worshiper of Mars. So we got Mars and Venus, and the Babylonian was the name for Mars was Marduk, and again the Babylonian name for the goddess for Venus was Ishtar. So Ishtar was Venus and Marduk was Mars, or is Mars. And so what do we have there? Well, we have 2 different planets. We've got Venus and Mars, and we got we got a masculine planet, at least that's how it's labeled. It's labeled by the ancients and still being labeled today. And we had the feminine planet, Venus. And they're both, to the naked eye, 2 different colors. One does look red, Mars, and one looks yellow or green or whatever, depending on how close it is to the planet. So we have 2 planets, one feminine, the male, masculine principle, and the feminine principle. And we got their Mars, war, and we got their Venus, lust, war and lust. The 2 go hand in hand. I mean, you watch a boxing match, and in between the rounds, where do you get those, I forget what those girls are called, but they come out with placards that state round 2, round 3, round 4. You can go there, think of the UFC fights and all those whatever MMA fights. And there's always got to be scantily clad woman paired up with a brutal fight. And it's just the 2 go hand in hand, because those are 2 emotions, I guess, raw emotions that very much have an effect on people, which is sex and violence. And the 2 go together. So as far as getting back in the book of Esther is concerned, Well, okay, yeah, so Esther is really, again, gets into the idea of a scapegoat. Now, a good author that really wrote a lot of detail about this was James George Fraser, and I actually have his abridged book right here. It's the Oxford version. I would recommend the Oxford version only because there's a little bit more material. There's all different kinds of abridged versions out there by different publishing companies. But with the Oxford edition, there's actually one chapter in there that they put back in there because James George Fraser had removed it after his he put it in his first edition, and then he kept expanding on the Golden Bell until I think there was until when he was finally done, those 12 or 13 volumes, which is a lot of reading. Found this was just a lot of reading on itself, so, and that's just an abridged version. But he got into the scapegoat theory, I guess you could say. And there's a chapter in there called The Crucifixion of Christ, and then there's a chapter in there, a subchapter really, that is in the chapter called the Saturnalia. So it's chapter 4 and chapter 5 of book 3 being called the Scapegoat. Saturnalia and the Crucifixion of Christ, both chapters would be very good for whoever's listening to read, because in that Saturnalia chapter there's the subchapter where she gets into the festival of Purim and connects it with this older Babylonian festival called the Sakia. I think that's how you say it. And so there was always this character in ancient Babylon that had to be, I think it was usually a convicted criminal, and he was basically given a robe and the king's crown, and he was allowed to play king for either a day or is it a week, can't recall. I think it might have been only a day, and he was the scapegoat. So after he was done playing king, he was put to death, and he may have been put to death by crucifixion, or he may have been hung. So if he was, either way, it's interesting because the crucifixion, you got the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and then if it was the hanging situation, then it brings to mind Haman and his 10 sons in the book of Esther being hung. So either way, it's interesting. But as far as Esther is concerned, like the book of Esther, well, yeah, that's obviously, we're talking about a Babylonian festival in there, and everybody knows the Jews were in Babylonian captivity for however long it was, and so did they pick up on some customs and culture and religions of the Babylonians? Well, of course, everybody has. The Christians have done the same thing too. If you look at, just like talking about this pagan calendar right here, with the 8 major festivals, Samhain being another word for Halloween, Yule, winter solstice, Embal, otherwise called Groundhog Day, Beltane, Litha, Mabon. So those holidays were incorporated by the Catholic Church and then mixed in with the type of Christianity, I suppose, that they adopted even way back in the time of Constantine and hybridized. So everybody has really boiled from one another's religion and culture and languages and whatever else. So we're all, as far as all the religions in the world are concerned, they're more same with one another than they are different from one another. But of course, nobody sees it that way. They think, well, no, my religion is better than yours, I'm better than you, and let's genocide you because you guys are so much different from us. But it's really not the case. But people, being the laity, being in denial of their own religious tenets, they don't study their own scriptures, they don't look into the origin and the history of their own religion. So yeah, they're never going to figure these things out. The people that have figured these things out, however, they like to wage wars on these certain holy days and when there's certain celestial events occurring up in the heavens, as they feel that it has more of an effect. I don't know. In their mind, I guess they would think it's a beneficial effect. In a lot of other people's minds, no, it's a malevolent effect. But in their mind, they think that whatever they're doing at that time is going to be strengthened by, I suppose, what you'd call synchromysticisms and and because of the events occurring above, and then so that's above, so below. So they got to do these things on certain dates, and that's expanding on what I just said about the scapegoat or the blood sacrifice. And it's just on a more major theme, because instead of one scapegoat, which maybe ancient cultures might have been more so content with that, instead when we have scapegoats today in the plural, we get, like as far as the Gulf War I is concerned, if you look at what happened on the Purim of then, like the Gulf War I climaxing on Purim, February 28th of that year, 1991, well, you had a blood sacrifice. Now, it was called the Highway of Death, and it was these Iraqi soldiers were retreating from Kuwait, and I think they got trapped on this highway, and they got bombed from above. I don't know how many got killed. I've looked at different estimates. Some people say, well, 100,000 got bombed, 150,000, which is a lot of people, and you have a number as low as 5,000, so who knows? I wasn't there, I didn't see the bodies, but whatever the case may be, there was a lot of scapegoats, plural, that were taken out on that special day. And then as far as Gulf War II, well, same thing. And then eventually you had the capture of Saddam Hussein, who was hung, which is interesting, hung like Haman. And prior to that, his two psychotic boys, Uday and Qusay, were involved in a shootout. At least that was reported. Who knows? But whether it was happened or not, still the concept of a scapegoat, the idea of a scapegoat, was put out there. So I remember they showed on the news, and I was watching it way back then. They were showing what appeared to be the bodies of Uday and Qusay. So you had two scapegoats, and then later on you got Saddam hung, one scapegoat, plus all the other many scapegoats that were killed in that war, both military and civilian. And then you had Gaddafi. He was, if that video of him is correct with the cell phone footage or whatever, shows him being chased down by I guess what you'd call the rebels, and some people call them freedom fighters, and maybe ISIS or whatever. These people killed him. So again, you had your scapegoat there. And now we're going to have probably, a lot more scapegoats. We're going to have Syrian scapegoats, and we're going to have Persian scapegoats, which is interesting about the Iranians / Persians because of the Book of Esther. Because again, it was the Book of Esther set. The setting is in Persia, or was in Persia, I should say. And Haman was a Persian, and his 10 sons were Persians. And it wasn't just them that were killed. There was actually, I forget, I should have this window open, but was it 80,000 Persians were killed also, in addition to Haman and his 10 sons? I think that's what was written in the Book of Esther, I think. So that's a lot of that was a lot of scapegoats, and there's going to be a lot more scapegoats, it appears to me, on the spring equinox of next year. So I think a lot of this celebration concerning the Afghanistan and Syria withdrawals are premature. I think that there's going to be disappointment, because it looks good, it sounds good, what's going on right now. But to me, the planets are telling a different story. And I don't know exactly. I know that as far as Mars is concerned, it came close again last August. I think it was last August. I think it came almost as close as it did to Earth as it did in 2003, right when the Gulf War II occurred. And I think it came just as close or almost as close, and that was last August as the peak. So I don't know if Mars is still close. I remember actually seeing it with my naked eye, and it was very bright and looked very big, and that was late summer. So I saw it myself, and I don't know where it is right now. There's a place called EarthSky, a website called EarthSky.org or .net or something. I like going there and checking things out, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of celestial events are going to be occurring on the date of March 20th of next year. And I'll be going to EarthSky, watch that, and I'll be watching the news, I suppose. Well, not really the news, but I'll be on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be either a surprise attack on Assad or the Ayatollahs of Iran. I don't know if it will be just a surprise attack or if there will be an actual declaration of war. If Trump will go on TV and spell out his reasons, maybe there'll be another chemical attack. There's been so many. Assad gassing his own people. And which brings to mind Saddam Hussein gassing the Kurds. But if that occurs, it wouldn't surprise me at all, because that's very much what I'm expecting of next year. Not hoping for that, but that's what I very much expect. And then expanding on that too, we're going to have to think, well, what would the repercussions of a war, a Purim, Spring Equinox / Biblical Passover war on Syria and Iran, what would occur? I would assume at least a recession. I don't know how bad. Maybe probably be worse than the 2007, 2008 recession. We haven't had one. Nothing major since then. And I know in America there's always seemed to be almost every 7 to 10 years there seems to be a recession, and they seem to be getting worse as time goes by. And then every time the recession's over, there always seems to be these these new billionaires that kind of come out of the scenes. They happen to run tech companies, and they happen to work in conjunction with one another. And there's a lot of censorship going on. So it's obviously these recessions are just not accidental, is what I'm trying to say. And it's just money being taken from the majority, and being concentrated in the hands of the few. So what we have is an oligarchy ruling over us. And a lot of these people that are of that oligarchy are into these kinds of things that I have just talked about: astrology, astronomy, ancient religion, the concept of the scapegoat, the concept of war. Oh yeah, there's another thing too, bringing in this Golden Bell book, which I would recommend everyone should read it, is that he talks about the concept of homeopathic magic and sympathetic magic. So basically you do something to get something done. So he puts many examples of all different kinds of peoples and cultures around the world, who even still some people are doing this today, where the men and the woman or whatever would put the seed in the ground, and to mimic that effect, because they want obviously a fruitful harvest come harvest time. So they would mimic that effect, and I forget if that's sympathetic magic or homeopathic magic, but they would mimic that by they themselves having sexual intercourse to the husbands and the wives, thinking that if they do this, then they're going to have an effect on the crops, the seed in the ground, and the seed that it's going to actually cause a fruitful harvest. So you got these weird oligarchic occultists that are in power over us today, and they believe this. They actually believe this, and that's why they like to do these wars not every so often, it seems like very frequently, to actually bring about the desired results that they look for in their own weird minds. And this is really strange to them to think like this. And the reason why is that if they think that the earth has to receive a harvest of dead bodies in order to continue producing, well, I wouldn't disagree with that in theory, but however, in practice, does one need to actually start a war and kill off millions of people just so that their blood will feed the soil, and then in exchange we will continue to get food and crops or whatever growing from the soil of this planet? Well, people die every day, naturally. They just die. You don't need to actually launch a war and cause the death of millions of people if that's what you believe, that you need to shed all this blood in order for the earth to continue to be bounteous to us. Because, well, people die all the time. People are constantly buried in the ground or cremated or whatever. And so if these people have this belief, this superstition or whatever you want to call it, then they have to kind of at least try to think rationally about this and think, does it have to be a violent death? And in their minds, they think they have to cause these violent episodes in order to continue with the prosperity of our planet. Seems like that's what they think. And when you think of that climate change, which is really a religion, it's a belief. So they're the ones pushing it, promoting it. And so you think, do they believe that, or is it just another scam for them in order to put another tax on the people? So it's hard to say. So what they really like to do is they just like doing these things in order for certain things to happen, which reminds me of another Aleister Crowley quote, which I want to share with the viewers. I think it's from forget now. I'll be right there. It's a very interesting quote because it seems like that's the kind of quote that these people live by, that they believe this kind of thing that Crowley believed, and which was, okay, I had it right here and all of a sudden it's not there. Let's try again. Oh yeah, okay, so this is from Liber O Subfigura 7. I'll just read a couple things here. It says, this book is very easy to misunderstand. Readers are asked to use the most minute critical care in the study of it, even as we have done in its preparation. In this book it is spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths of spirits and conjurations, of gods, spheres, planes, and many other things which may or may not exist. It is immaterial whether these exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results will follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophic validity to any of them. So I think it's a very pertinent quote as far as what I just presented, because these people that are in control of things globally, that's what they believe. So it doesn't matter whether they believe in these things objectively or not. Just like it says in the quote, they think that by doing certain things, certain results will follow. And so they go by a lot of things. Again, astronomy, astrology, and they go by blood sacrifice, the notion of the scapegoat. And I can just go on to, again, what Fraser wrote here in his book about homeopathic magic and sympathetic magic. So you do certain things and certain results happen. And the way it looks like I don't think they're going to be able to turn down. First, like I said, you know, the average person is not going to look at a date like that and think, oh wow, this is a very impressive date. We should do something spectacular. No, the average person doesn't think like that, but the occultist does, and the occultists do run the system. They run this world, and call them witches or whatever, but there's witches in the media, there are witches in government, there are witches in the military, there are witches in church, there are witches in the mosque, witches in the synagogue, witches in the religion of Hinduism, Buddhism, and they pretty much work all in tandem with one another. And they have this goal, and the goal is to really a globalized government, and that's how you bring it about. Look at World War I, how destructive it was, and you had your League of Nations. It fell apart eventually because the United States didn't want to have anything to do with it, or the U.S. Senate anyway, the President Wilson did. Then you had World War II, and you had the United Nations, so America went into that, and you have Trump saying, you know, I'm going to defund, not stop giving the United Nations money, or hold back a lot of money, or a pull out. And you can make those threats all he wants, but it's not going to get anywhere. If he does pull out, then that means that there's some other organization, global organization, that's going to come about possibly as a result of this war of next year, which will be even worse than the United Nations. It'll be more tyrannical, more powerful, because the United Nations today has its limits. It has to respect somewhat the sovereignty of each nation that is a member state of it. But that could change as far as a new body coming into being. You could have something where all the nations that become members of it, whether they do so willingly or not, will not have any sovereignty whatsoever. And I think I'm pretty much done. So I think, to sum it up, these wars have occurred on these certain holy days in the past, and there is no reason to say, well, to think that it's just going to stop now, that it's not going to occur in the future. And when you have something coming up as far as spring equinox of next year, like that, and you got 3 holy days converging on one day, well, I just think that there's just no way that that day is going to be passed up by the elite, and they're going to, unfortunately, they're going to launch a war, which I suspect will be on Iran and Syria. So, like I said, celebrations that everybody's all happy about as far as the Syria and Afghanistan withdrawal. Well, that to me is something that will be very short-lived. I hope you enjoyed this video. Try to present it in an easy way to understand. I really didn't prepare for it, just a jumble of information that I stuck together, thought I'd lay it out there. Didn't really mean to speak this long either, but what's done is done. I guess you could just say, well, as far as the book of Esther is concerned, it's a book about a scapegoat. It's a book about Marduk and Ishtar, and of course we'll call Mordecai and Esther in that work. And it's just a book, I think, to me, it seemed like it's like what James George Fraser put in his work. It really seems to me it's not talking about a biblical holiday, but it's more so talking about a Babylonian holiday. And reminds me of what it says in Revelation about Mystery Babylon the Great, the harlot, and so on and so forth. And it just, Babylon meaning confusion. Well, yeah, the whole world's very confused. I almost forgot something, but I wanted to bring that up. Because in this book, The Golden Bough, James George Fraser theorizes or posits the theory that Purim and Passover may have been at one time one on the same holiday, which is very interesting. Because, of course, Jesus Christ being a scapegoat or whatever, and he had a purple robe put on him and a crown of thorns, so he was basically, not only was he scapegoated, but he was also treated as a king for a day, I guess you could say. So, which brings to mind, again, that Babylonian festival of Sakia, where that convicted criminal or whatever, Jesus Christ being convicted criminal, really not a criminal, but considered a criminal, put to death anyway by the cross. So you had in that old Babylonian festival of a convicted criminal being able to play the king. I think those for one day, or it might have been 4 days, 7 days, I forget, or 3 days. So anybody that wants to read that will find that very interesting. And I find it interesting in considering that of next year of spring equinox, yet you're going to have Purim and the biblical Passover, not the rabbinical Passover, but the biblical Passover occurring on the same day, which almost might be a confirmation of Fraser's theory of Purim and Passover being one and the same festival or holiday, whichever you want to call it. And I think I am finished with this upload, and that was, well, almost 50 minutes. Okay, Merry Christmas, and let's see what happens next year.